Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name's Jodi Rudoren. I'm editor-in-chief of The Forward, and we're so happy to have you for the last in our series of Meet the Forward 50. I'm going to filibuster for a bit as we let people roll in because we have a very large audience today for our very awesome and very female panel. So while you're coming in and settling in, feel free to post in the chat where you're calling in from today or what your connection is to any of our panelists or to the Forward, or really just share anything you like about how you're doing today. And for those who are still coming in, again, welcome. My name's Jodi. I'm editor-in-chief of the Forward. And we have this great panel today of 3 of our Forward 50. Every year we pick 50 American Jews who are inspiring or impactful or all of the above on the news and on our lives. And we've this year piloted having conversations with them. They're random conversations. They're not about anything in particular. They're about these amazing people and their perspectives on life and the news. And today we have 2 rabbis, Benay Lappe and Angela Buchdahl. And we have Marina Yudborovsky, whose name I'm sure I'm butchering. No, she says I did it okay. And we'll introduce them in just a second. But before I start, I'm going to just give a few little tachlis points. And thank you for sharing in the chat. Feel free to keep doing that. You can use the chat throughout the conversation to comment on what you're hearing, to share your own perspective on one of the questions, or to share a link that you think might be helpful to the audience. And we will also be doing that throughout the time, sharing links and stuff. And you should, when you're doing that, make sure you're chatting to all panelists and attendees, or just panelists attendees. If you chat just to the panelists, none of your fellow audience members will see it, and it will be sad. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, or like me to ask one of the panelists, that's great, but don't put those in the chat. Please put those in the Q&A, which is a separate little thing found likely where your chat button is also found, on either the bottom if you're on a laptop or the left if you're on a tablet. I think everyone knows how to Zoom by now, although undoubtedly we'll have some moment where somebody is not muted or is muted when they're talking, and we'll get over it. Last point, I think, for now, is that you will get a video of this conversation in your email, along with a discount subscription offer from the Forward that you can use and share with your family and friends. And you'll also be able to make sure you sign up for our free newsletters so that you always get informed of our upcoming events. And I want to just also thank Gabby Brooks, who's behind the scenes managing this Zoom and who is broadcasting it live on Facebook. You are welcome to go to our Facebook page and then share it on your own Facebook page or Twitter. We'd love you to help spread the word about this conversation. And now I will actually introduce our panelists. Actually, you know what I'm going to do before, rather than introduce all of them, I am going to start by introducing Rabbi Benay Lappe, who is going to start us off with a few words of Torah. I like, one of the nice benefits of working at the Forward and not at the New York Times anymore is that I get to start events with the words of Torah when I have rabbis with me. And because we have 2 today, we're going to start and end with little mini Divrei Torah. So Rabbi Benay Lappe, who is the founder and rosh yeshiva at SVARA, is going to lead us off. SVARA is a traditionally radical yeshiva about which she will explain more. She is a conservative rabbi was ordained by the JTS, and she has been created really the specialty of applying queer theory to Talmud study. SVARA and Rabbi Lappe have seen a huge boon in audience and participation during the pandemic. She has, she's bringing, they are bringing the Talmud from the 1% to the other 99% of the Jewish people and beyond. Lots of people who are not Jewish are participating in her events. So I'm going to hand it over to her to start us off and set the mood. Rabbi Lappe.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I want to begin the way we begin in all of our spaces at SVARA, and that is to invite everyone. And I'm talking to all of you out there who are watching, not just the panelists and Jodi, but all of you, to take a moment to dedicate this next hour of learning to someone or something. There is this notion in the tradition that when we learn, that experience of learning is healing and reparative and of benefit, not only to those of us who are learning, but the power can be healing out into the world and to those to whom we direct that power. Just as on Shavuot, we learn all night and we call that a tikkun. It comes from the idea that the learning is actually repairing the world for others. So I'd like to invite you all to put into the chat a dedication. You can say, I'd like to dedicate my learning today too. And it can be someone who is traveling, that they may have a safe journey, or someone in need of healing, physical or spiritual. Perhaps someone thanks to whom you're here today, someone who would just kvel, who would be so proud that you're in on this conversation. And though we're not learning from actual texts today, we're learning from each other. And I think the tradition has always understood that it's our ultimate goal to become embodiments of Torah. I'm sure I'm not alone in watching the 3rd season of Shtisel. Y'all watching that? Okay, so I won't give anything away, but I'll tell a little story from the 2nd episode of the 3rd season, which is as far as I've gotten. And in this episode, Hanina, the 20-year-old yeshiva student, goes to his rosh yeshiva. And there is a medical procedure. It's an elective procedure that he wants his wife to have, but he knows that it is a forbidden procedure in his community. I won't tell you what it is. And he goes to his rosh yeshiva and he asks, can I do this? Can my wife have this procedure? It's for her. And he makes the argument that her life could be in danger if she doesn't have it. And they have a conversation. And at the end, the rosh yeshiva says to him, Hanina, at this point in your learning, the Torah is not outside of you. It is your flesh and your blood. It's in your bones. It's who you are. Any decision you make will be a Torah decision. Any judgment you make will reflect the Torah. And in our tradition, I think, has always understood that. You know, we have this system of 613 mitzvot, right? And 612 of them are technologies to help us become a certain kind of person. They're practices and prayers and holidays and rituals. And then comes the 613th. And you know what the 613th mitzvah is? Shekol echad miYisrael, that each and every one of us, sheyichtov lo sefer Torah, that each and every one of us should write a Torah. Write a Torah. And the commentators go wild about this. Is it possible that every one of us, every person in the whole Jewish people is going to write a Sefer Torah? How is that possible? And my favorite of all the answers to the dilemma of how is every person supposed to write a Torah for their own lives is, no, you don't write a Torah for your life. You write a Torah with your life. And if you've done the 612, if you've kind of done enough of them right, and we may not all have to do all of them, but as a community, if we kind of collectively take care of them, we become walking Torahs, just like the Rosh Yeshiva saying to Hanina. So I just want to dedicate my learning today to all of you who are walking your Torah through the world, and specifically to my mom as well, who is out there today watching, in honor and gratitude for the Torah of your life. That has been the greatest Torah of my life. So thank you also.
Oh, Yasser Koach. Thank you so much. I love a rabbi who, for her Dvar Torah, uses as text a television show. That really works for me. So thank you for starting us off with that. And the very impressive non-spoilerism. I would have given away much more, but we're going to do a whole separate Zoom on the various I'll say medical related, although I was going to say something narrower, issues brought up in Shtisel. which maybe we'll invite you back for. Anyhow, I'm gonna, so now just joining Rabbi Lappe and I for this conversation are Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, who I have actually known since college. I was incredibly lucky to know her and her husband at Yale. And many of you know her. She is the senior rabbi of Central Synagogue, one of the largest synagogues in Manhattan. She's the first woman to lead that congregation. Has many firsts. She was the first Korean American, Asian American cantor, and the first rabbi ordained in this country. She's born in Korea to a Buddhist mother and an American Jewish father. Rabbi Buchdahl has had such an interesting year. She had delayed a sabbatical, but then just had it this year, and has just recently signed a book deal for a memoir called The Soul of a Stranger. And she'll talk about that and how her rabbinate has emphasized innovation, criminal justice reform, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also she is a model of bringing music into her spiritual leadership. And our third panelist is Marina Yudborovsky, whose name is very intimidating to me, but I think I've made it now twice. She is the new CEO of the Genesis Philanthropy Group, having taken over in the middle of the last year when her predecessor died suddenly. Genesis is a global family of foundations. It's focused on three areas: connecting Jews in Israel and throughout the diaspora, strengthening the Jewish identity of Russian-speaking Jews around the world, and supporting Jewish communities in the UK and Spain. Marina, was born in the Ukraine, and she came to the United States in 1989. And in addition to being one of the few female CEOs in the Jewish nonprofit world, she's also one of the youngest. And so I'm going to just start us off by asking, we'll start with Rabbi Angela and then Marina and then back to Benay. So talk a little bit about your 2020, your pandemic year. This was a year that we put you onto our Forward 50. I had my reasons, but tell us a little bit about the challenges and the highlights. Just give us a couple minutes of a window into your 2020 and the learnings from it, I guess.
All right. I'm so happy to have this invitation to be here. And I just want to begin with a thank you to Rabbi Benay for beginning with this dedication, because just seeing these dedications pour in just kind of opened my heart and put it in a different place. So thank you for beginning us with that. And it's a reminder of just the sense of connections that we can all make, and especially through learning. And let's see. I guess I didn't prepare a perfect answer for this, but I would say that maybe one of the things I learned this year in particular was that joy doesn't come from what I do, but from my level of presence in it. And it's one of these things you learn in mindfulness, and that almost every religious tradition tries to teach you to do, to be fully present in whatever you're doing. But I had to learn it in a very different way. In particular, I'll just give you a snapshot of my sabbatical. My previous sabbatical, which was supposed to start last March, included all these things that are the most fun things to do, including lots of travel, training for a triathlon was on my bucket list, and taking an improv comedy class with my husband. Instead, I got to take one improv Zoom class with Jodi's husband, which was super fun. But when I rescheduled it for this last November, none of those things were possible. And I actually, while you can't feel sorry for yourself for having a 4-month sabbatical, I was feeling a little bit like all I get to do is be in my New York apartment with a working husband, a daughter in school, and like I can't even go to a coffee shop. Like I was sort of thinking, what am I going to do? And what I found is that it was just what the gift of the time and the inability to do anything was actually complete presence in the small things that I actually enjoy doing every day that I never have time for, but also just can do without interruption of just cooking, some yoga, some meditating, some writing. I've always found writing to be an incredibly painful process, but I actually found it's only painful when you actually feel distracted, that when you actually don't have anything else you can do, it's actually incredibly gratifying. And it just poured out of me. I didn't expect to write a book proposal in my sabbatical, but that was one of those things that came out of the time. And I had a sense of, I noticed how easily and quickly I laughed, and how much joy was present. So I guess this is one of these lessons that I want to take with me. And I think that one of the things that people have found when they can't do all the things they want to do is that it's really about shaping our the present moment that we're in. And so that's one of the things that I think that we're learning so much more of. My community has actually found so much more comfort, I think, in being with each other, being present in Jewish spiritual practice in a certain way that maybe they weren't open to before. One snapshot is that I taught a meditation class at Central about 5-6 years ago, and I had about 8 people show up. When I did it during the pandemic, I had 400 people every day meditating with me. It was, we were open to something very different. And I think that that is going to change us even when we start getting back to life. And it's going to be more of a challenge to be fully present when we get back to life. But I think that that's actually been one of the beautiful parts of this.
Thank you. Marina, I've been thinking about, all of us, I think, have had to adapt our work lives and have seen, some pros and some cons. I'm certainly not looking forward to commuting again. I've done some hiring during this period and thought about how hard it is to take on a new job. And as I just thought about your challenge of not just taking on a new job, but becoming the head of an organization in the middle of this, I just thought, I just wanted to crawl under the couch and hide. So I'd love you to tell us how you did that and how it's going and how you managed to kind of figure out how to start a big new thing during such a tumultuous time, the middle of, I think it was June, right? So you're talking about the pandemic and the uprising over the George Floyd's killing and 2 months before or 3 months before this huge polarizing election. So tell us how you did it and how it's going.
Well, first of all, thank you. It's an honor to be on this list. It's an honor to be in this virtual room. And I'll say that, I think partially at least because of kind of immigrating as a child and moving so much, I think that can sort of go one of two ways. Either then that means that you're really great with change and you really sort of embrace that and you kind of find that you enjoy that. Or like me, you really don't like that and you're not going to put yourself in that situation if you can. I'm really a creature of habit. I have the same thing for breakfast every morning.
What do you have for breakfast?
I have a bar and coffee. Same bar, exactly.
Sorry to interrupt. That's one of my favorite questions.
Now.
I love asking people what they have for breakfast.
Yeah. Pancakes on Sunday, though. That's our tradition at home. So change is in general not something that I like to throw myself into. And this year has certainly cured me of that to some extent. What immigration didn't do, the pandemic has. So on the one hand, I mean, it has been challenging and I've contemplated the under the couch way of handling it. I think certainly felt right at certain moments, but I've also, I've been very lucky, mostly because I've been with the foundation for 12 years. And I think that while certainly this is a new job and has been challenging in a whole host of ways, I also had a team that I knew really well. And it's been incredible through this that I couldn't have done any of this without. I wasn't coming in to something new and I wasn't meeting a whole entire new team. And I knew the work that we were doing to the extent that the work remained the same. As we all know, even when we knew what we were doing, we had to do it a different way. Every single one of our grantees had to figure out how to, that favorite word of everyone's, pivot, and figure out how to do it in a different way. And we wanted to be there for them. We also opened a new COVID emergency assistance portfolio, an area we don't ever work in. We don't normally fund in the humanitarian and social services sectors. So, but, at the same time, we didn't have any choice. And I think there's a lot of times when you don't have any choice, you just sort of put one foot in front of the other. And here we are, hopefully on our way kind of out of this situation. And we were just talking before everyone joined. about the fact that now that we're kind of coming to the other side, trying to figure out how to exit this pandemic state is its own set of challenges and changes that we all have to deal with.
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of try to lead us there. And Benay, I want to hear about your 2020. And one of the things I know that happened was that you were one of many organizations. And Angela talked about her own experience of this too. It was like suddenly geography is not an issue, and everything's out there in this kind of democratized marketplace. And you saw this huge influx of people who were interested in what you were doing. So I want to hear a little bit about that and how you managed it, and now how you're thinking about what is SVARA's next phase when people are all vaccinated and you start going back into in person. How do you balance who you used to be, who you've become, who you want to be?
We understand this pandemic as a collective crash, that while we didn't know it was going to happen as a result of a virus, we've been talking about it and anticipating it in the Jewish context since we began, and we've been around for 18 years now. We understand how we do Jewish and the framework of the Jewish community and organizations and what we're about as having been in a crumble for about the last 150 years. And this moment, this pandemic has accelerated this crumble into the crash that if you have a framework for and an understanding of what your options are after a crash is not so tragic. Because without a framework, when there comes to be a mismatch between your reality and or how you understand things and what you've been told, you really only have two options: take it or leave it, right? Option one is, let's deny that this crash happened and get back to the way things were as quickly as possible. And option two is, it's over. It's, I'm out of here. It's over. This can't continue. And option three is, let's figure out what still works, what works well. Let's keep those things. Let's build in what we now are able to do that we never were able to do. Play, experiment, and know that the number of people coming along on this new reworked way, in this case of being Jewish, is going to be a lot smaller. That's okay. That's the way it is. So for us at SVARA, and for me personally, it's been a year of experimentation. We did things we never, even though this is our framework, this is our DNA, this crash framework. And if anyone wants to know more, they can watch my 18-minute Eli talk. And I think that there might be a link to that. We still experimented with things that we never would have done before. Methodologies for learning that weren't sort of orthodox SVARA. And so now we have, for example, a daily half-hour learning that doesn't follow our typical methodology, but people have told us is like a lifeline for them. And it's been a lifeline for us. I said to my buddy, Dan Liebenson, yeah, let's do this oral Talmud project. So once a week, we do a live stream and we talk about Talmud to an audience that is a completely different audience from the one that we reach in the Beit Midrash. And because we're now online, we're able to, as you said, reach people all over the country and internationally. And we've sort of, grown into the very small international movement we were into a very, very large movement.
Awesome. So I gave you guys some notes on stuff I was going to ask you about, and now I'm going to ask you about stuff that wasn't on the notes because you're saying more interesting things already. And one of the things that all three of you have in common, right, is being in some ways outsiders, and also I think taking space inside. So whether it's being Korean and Jewish, it's being an immigrant, being queer, but Benay went to JTS, and Angela is, the rabbi at a very mainstream Reform synagogue. And Marina's now heading this big organization. So I'm interested in your thought. Let's just talk about outsiders and insiders and what does that even mean? And, how do we, I guess the goal would be that a Judaism and a Jewish community that's inclusive enough that nobody feels outside. But I wonder, just talk about how you've navigated this, because Rabbi Benay was just talking about how it's so central to your work, is that perspective and that crashing. So I'd just love to hear other folks, Angela and Marina, maybe jump in, and then we can just chat.
Well, this is very close to my heart, this topic. I think that we live in a society that is very fearful of being an outsider. And I guess I want to reclaim that there's actually such a power to being an outsider, and that it's actually perhaps the existential state of what it is to be a Jew. And I say that because the story of our people began with God calling Abraham and saying, you don't actually get to start this faith from the safety of your birthplace and your home. You actually have to go to this place I'm going to show you that you don't even know yet, and you're going to have to be a stranger there. And it's only there that you can start Judaism. And when he crossed over the Euphrates and became an Ivri, which literally means the person who crosses over, I would say that he set the model of Jews as boundary crossers always. That's really in some ways I would say that's the essence or the thesis of my book, is actually the spiritual imperative to be a boundary crosser. And and I think that the state of being an outsider, it necessitates an empathy, because once you know what it's like to be the person who's on the outside, you can't look at someone who feels like they're a stranger and see them as other than you. You know what that feels like. And if you are the outsider, it necessitates a kind of creativeness to be able to work around the gatekeepers who want to keep you out. And so I think about Benay, she's like, okay, you're not going to let me teach the way, I'm going to create a whole new thing. And, I think that we've been a creative minority wherever we've lived as Jews. That's been our genius. And I think there's also a perspective you can have when you're an outsider that is just seeing things from the big picture and not making the assumptions that people who've been on the inside always have. So I guess my reframing of this is please put yourself into a position with some regularity where you're boundary crossing and becoming the stranger over and over again. That sort of restlessness, that sort of perspective, that sort of vulnerability is actually at the heart of our growth as human beings and as a Jewish people. And I actually will venture, I don't want to get political, but I will venture to say that the times the Jews have become the most comfortable, and the word established in Hebrew, actually, when God actually says, don't become established, when you and your children become established, you're going to become idol worshipers. That word actually comes from the same word as to fall asleep. When you become complacent and you start to worry about what you've built up more than about what you're actually promoting, we start to worship the idols of the institutions we've built, our power, rather than actually being the people we need to be in the world. So actually, I would say the danger is staying still, not being the outsider.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking about that, I love the perspective of the idea of that history. But one of the things that I think we're grappling with right now is the way, Jews have struggled with what are they supposed to do when they're powerful and established and not the minority. And this has come up so much in the last year here and in our politics, and it's really a big theme. So I think I'm glad you brought it there. Marina, you must have been very, very young when you immigrated to this country, but you grew up obviously in an immigrant family, so there is some of that duality too. So I wonder how you think of yourself.
I moved here when I was 9. It's all right. When I got named CEO, the headline read 39-year-old woman named CEO, which is a separate conversation. So that's now in the public domain. My age is no longer a secret. Meanwhile, it was 2 weeks before my 40th birthday, so I guess it was only relevant for a little while. But, I also grew up with this very strong perspective that being an outsider was an advantage. My parents, when I was small, continued to speak Russian at home, despite the fact that it was to the detriment of them acquiring English in order to ensure that I retained my Russian. And I did, right? And I use that every day. But it was very much in the context of a perspective that having that additional linguistic, cultural, identity perspective was a plus, not a detriment. That the idea wasn't to become like everybody else, but that having those varied experiences makes you stronger and gives you abilities that you can leverage in all kinds of ways. And so I couldn't agree more with what Angela you just said. And I think the only thing I'd add to that is that it's also such a matter of perspective. You know, on the one hand, I came here as an outsider, and in some ways, you know, within the context of, let's say, religious Judaism, which is not something I grew up with, despite having very strong cultural Jewish ties and a passport, perhaps the only one on this panel, which said I was Jewish. My birth certificate did as well. But I didn't have those experiences. And so one way to look at that is that makes me an outsider. But the other perspective is, you know, the formative experience for a wide breadth of American Jews was the Free Soviet Jewry movement. So how much of an outsider can I be as the beneficiary of this, you know, global Jewish movement, and certainly one that so many in the United States participated in and worked towards, right? Because we have this connection. There's only so much you can claim that outsider status given that sort of tie-in.
Thanks. You know, it's interesting. I think we did an event earlier this week with Mohammed Darawshe, the Arab Israeli thinker and politician, and we talked a lot about. He talks about his dual identities as a Palestinian and Israeli, and one of the things we talked about was how I think you all obviously also have dual identities, I guess, and the truth is we all have multiple identities, and the idea that we don't is crazy. And I feel like Marina's generation and my kids' generation are getting to a much smarter place with, and I think it comes a little bit from an understanding of gender fluidity, but it's like identity is fluid and mixed and changes over time and changes in circumstances, and we all are many things. And I think, Benay, you got there a little bit before a lot of other people. So I, you know, wonder how you go ahead and pick up on the identity issue or the outsider question.
Yeah, I think, you know, I was talking about the crumble earlier. The queerest folk are crumbling before everybody else. And when I say queerest, right now what I mean is not just people who are of a sexual orientation or gender minority. I'm talking about people who have a profound experience of otherness or marginality about anything, whether it's disability or economic status or race or gender or sexuality, or you name it. Those are the people who catch on first, that things are amiss, that things need to be fixed. And they're like prophets. And after an enormous crash, when times like this happen, it is disproportionately the queer folk, the folks on the margins, who are the leaders because they've been on the front lines for a while now. They have the experience. They already know what needs to be fixed, and they fix it. You know, after the destruction of the temple, we know that the early rabbis were disproportionately represented by converts and children of converts. That early rabbinic Judaism was populated by the non-consumers, the outsiders of the former form of Judaism. And so it's going to be the outsiders who are the architects of the next Jewish future. And just on the issue of queerness, and now I'm talking about gender and sexual orientation, the next generation, Gen Z, is overwhelmingly queer-headed. Depending on the study you look at, between 34% to 52% of Gen Z identifies as queer. Okay? What they're saying when they say they identify as queer is, for some of them, it's a sexual orientation. For some of them, it's a gender identity. And for some of them, they're saying, this is the set of values. This is the perspective that seems right to me. And speaking for our Jewish future, they are not going to show up unless the Jewish spaces available to them and the Jewish values reflect what is for them absolutely non-negotiable, and as it should be.
Can I just pick up on one thing that both of you are making me think, which is both, I think that there is a tension between, I think, each of us having felt as outsiders, but also each of us in our own deep ways creating a sense of home or belonging. And sometimes we have to make those places, and sometimes it's been, part of the larger community has drawn us in. And I think that tension is actually really deeply important. And I remember that when I was younger, and first came to America, I was 5. And when I first came to school, I was still like, bringing seaweed in my lunch and barely spoke English. And so kids would say, "Where are you from?" And I would say, "Well, I'm from Korea." But then my first trip back to Korea when I was 8, I remember the kids there said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from Korea." They said, "No, you're not." And I remember I was deeply upset that I just sort of felt homeless. And I remember going to my mother and saying, like, "I don't have a home." And my mom said, "No, home is wherever your people are." And I think that this deep sense of home wherever that you can make home and also feel an outsider, when we can balance both of those things, because you do have to, human beings need to belong. We need to find our people. And I think that when you can both carry a sense of outsiderness and home and belonging, which gives you sort of enough roots to to feel safe in that outsiderness almost. I think that that's where the genius comes. And I think that the Jewish community, that has been a balance that we've had through all the centuries that I think is a really important one. And I love the fact that, like, I mean, Benay is basically saying, watch out, the next generation, this is going to be home. This is going to be the majority, right? Or for Marina to say, the Jewish community already said we belonged, even if you felt both those things. And I think that's part of the multiplicity of our identities and the complicated nature of being human.
And I'd like to suggest that in addition to, actually, I would like to suggest that we just stop with the inclusion thing, because what we need really are not places where those on the margins are quote unquote welcomed, because you can't be all of your fabulousness in a place where you're sort of tolerated and allowed in, but the culture of the space is unquestioned. We need spaces that are affinity spaces where queer folk and Jews of color and people with disabilities can be with their people, like the inner circle of their people. Not that we're not all each other's people, but the inner circle, to develop confidence and to develop our Torah, to bring to the pluralist spaces.
And that works so, I think, interestingly
Angela,
across all the spaces, because we have that conversation in our work in the context of sort of engagement of the Russian-speaking Jewish community, let's say in the United States, right? And 30 years ago, a word that was commonly used was acculturation, right? And we've thankfully grown out of that. But there's still this idea, right? Welcome is still, we welcome everyone, you hear organizations say. But the problem is when you have to welcome somebody, right? There's still that host-guest sort of relationship. And it's often, even with the best, when the welcoming is done with the very best of intentions, it is often the case that until people can actually create their own space with the sort of the folks who are relevant to them in whatever context that is, it's only then that they really feel a part of that community and where they really can find sort of that home, right? Rather than if they're being welcomed. You're never welcomed into your own home. At least I'm not.
Yeah,
I don't know anybody else.
Right. I think it's really interesting listening to Angela talk about it, about, finding and making your own space, but you've done actually so much more than that, right? Because now you lead a space that created that space for other people who may or may not have even known they were missing it. And similarly, Benay, who's, created this whole space for a particular approach to Talmud that's sent, as you were just talking about. So I think it's interesting. It's not just like, I need to find my home. It's like you managed to figure out, I need to host, I need to create that space for all these other people. I wanted to, so today is the, I think 18th day of the Omer, which I know only because I Googled it, because I am once again not doing this, not counting the Omer in a particularized or, meaningful way. Which last year I thought, oh, I should do something with this. And the year before I thought that too. And I just made a pledge with a staff member that we're going to try to do something cool about it next year. So I want to know from the three of you, how, if you are counting the Omer, or how you think about this period in the Jewish calendar. And, obviously this is a ritual that begins in Orthodox circles as part of the daily davening, maybe in other circles too. But I think there's been some new reinventions of this ritual, some new minhagim around it. And I'm interested in hearing your all perspectives and things that maybe we can each do. And also, can we start now? Can we catch up? Can we do it once a week instead of every day? I don't know.
I would also like to know the answers to these questions. I also Googled it.
I would say that last year when I was leading meditation daily during the pandemic, the idea of counting and numbering our days became deeply significant in a way that I never thought of quite the same way before, because days just were running together and you had no sense of time. And I just remarked, I remarked at how much it's a 39-day period, 39-day period of 49-day period of counting, and that so much can happen in 49 days. And when we started counting together, I just told everyone to think about what they were doing 49 days before. And for me, it was like, it included going to like a conference that had 16,000 people, it was crazy how much our world had changed in those 49 days. And so I've never had such meaningful Omer counting. I would say that this year I've been very inconsistent. And part of it is I don't lead my daily meditation group anymore. And I realized that part of what felt meaningful was doing it with a community. And it feels very different when you do it kind of on your own. But because of my practice last year, my father-in-law sends to our entire family a picture, and he counts the Omer with us every day. And that's been very sweet and meaningful.
I have to confess, I'm bad at counting. I'm bad at consistency. I'm bad at anything that I have to do every day. Like counting. And I also was grateful for the sense of community last year during the Omer when we began our daily Mishnah collective. And there is a tradition, as part of our tradition, of learning one of the 49 ways of acquiring Torah. It's the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot, and it's really beautiful. And it's about the ways that we might change or live into becoming those embodiments of Torah. And there's one for each day. And that was very meaningful. And I have to confess that we've now moved on in our daily Mishnah learning, although we should have gone back and done those 49 again.
Great, thank you. Rabbi Buchdahl, what happened to the meditation? Why did it end? Was it because of your sabbatical, or?
Yeah, well, when I started to, I loved doing it. It's maybe one of the most meaningful things I've ever gotten to do in my rabbinate. When it got close to the high holidays, I just the high holiday preparation was so much that I moved it to twice a week, starting in August, I think, and people still stayed with me. Then when I was on sabbatical, I took a break. I did just bring it back. Right now it's once a week. I was surprised that I had over 200 people join me for my first day back. So that was really nice, even after a 5-month break away. And anyone, just an open invitation to anyone here to join me for the meditation. It's on our website. I can send the link, but it's this is one of those things that will never be in person. It will remain forever. People can be in their pajamas. I'm often with a cup of coffee in my pajamas, still leading it. And there's actually an intimacy to the feeling of none of the cameras are on. It's just totally an oral experience. But the number of people who've told me they feel that they know me in such a different way because of it, and my own feeling of deep connection with a community of people that are literally just names and phone numbers. is profound, and it was truly a way that I sort of processed my experience of the pandemic last year. But even now, it's sort of the way that I ruminate and reflect on something very different. And so I would just say that it might come back to more than once a week. I was already petitioning and lobbying for that, but I'm starting up again this way. But I think that it's I think one of the things that you sort of had alluded to asking about, just what's going to stay the same and different. There was such a different knowing that people had as community members when we would do, like, we started these clergy coffees that were in our living room, or people did cooking, and people were just welcomed into our kitchen as, we made pickles or whatever it was. And it's suddenly, we haven't worn robes for a long time as clergy, but suddenly another layer of kind of distance was removed with the pandemic. And I don't think we're ever going to go back. And I actually think that there's something really powerful and beautiful about what has happened.
I love how you put that. And I do think there was a moment when you just said you were in your pajamas with your coffee that I feel like all of us were like, I got to see that. And then you told us that the cameras are off, which is
right. I'm not quite there yet where I'm ready to be in my pajamas with everyone looking at me.
That makes sense.
But it changes my mood. It changes my mood. I want to
turn that question back to I actually, first I have to share that my own rabbi, who I think Mark Katz, told me very early in the pandemic. I don't know if I haven't asked him about this lately, but when he first started doing Zoom services, he said he always wore his rabbi shoes, even though nobody could see them. He was like, that's how I get my rabbi on. I got to be in rabbi mode, which I thought was hilarious. But I want to ask you a little bit more pointedly about, one of the big questions I think we are all facing now is, what will synagogues look like next? Our synagogue is having its first in-person service outdoors this Friday. I got to be one of the first 30 people that got to sign up. We have a limited space. Obviously, synagogues are going to come back and open up. And there was a lot of discussion after last year's high holidays about the ways in which the Zoom and hybrid experience was actually quite lovely. And I wonder what you're thinking about at Central in terms of how things will change for the future. I want to say one more thing, which is, long before the pandemic, the model of the synagogue was not working terribly well for our generation, probably my parents' generation. And I think that one of the hopes is that what did you call it? A crash, Benay? That the crash and the crumbling is going to force, we know it forced innovation in the moment. Will it force lasting change? So I wonder how you're thinking about that at Central in terms of change and what will come back.
I'm going to start by just saying that I recognize that Central's, I don't feel like we are in the same position as a lot of synagogues I can't say that I know all the reasons, but we were very fortunate that we basically not only didn't lose members, but members felt more connected. We said we weren't sure about our financial situation. We had people gave more money than they've given in past years, and our wait list grew, and we're now looking into how we welcome in virtual members who have been a part of our community, but maybe grew by tenfold over this year's high holidays, and who really want to become members of Central. So we're now exploring virtual membership and what that looks like. There's at least one person on this chat, Alyssa, who is a full-time member who lives in Chicago and has never been to Central Synagogue and joins us for programming almost every single day. Right, Alyssa? You can't respond, but I know you're there and you can hear me. And I think that that might sound like it's an outlier, but actually there's a surprising number of people who the boundaries of where you can belong or who your clergy are or who your community is has completely changed. And I think even more significant than the fact that someone like Alyssa feels connected to me or clergy, she's connected to congregants that she has met through this community, and they are become very good friends, and she has shared that many times. So I think that it's forcing a total rethink of what community means, what membership and belonging and home mean. And I know that they're going to be, I really am very mindful that different synagogues are going to struggle with very different things, and these are high-class problems we get to struggle with a wait list. But I do think that if you are innovating and thinking outside of the box, that there are opportunities that were never available that are actually quite profound and meaningful.
And maybe one of the things that I've seen just, in a variety of communities that we work in, is it's not just, I think there was a lot of conversation about the fact that maybe synagogues weren't working because people weren't interested. But perhaps one thing that we've learned, because now you didn't have to go and you could zoom into whatever community fit your needs, people are quite obviously interested. They just maybe couldn't have access to what was the right fit for them. In some cases prior to the pandemic, which is obviously both a little sad, but also very heartening, I think.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I'm gonna close by asking you guys to talk about and also asking our audience to post in the chat about what habit or hobby that you have developed during this crisis you want to hold on to. But before we do that, I want to do a quick lightning round asking I know you're all incredibly busy, but I want to know what you're reading. What are you reading for pleasure, or what's the latest book that you read that you want to share? We know Rabbi Benay is watching Shtisel, which I did too. But anyway, Marina, start with you. What are you reading, or what is something you read in the last year that you want to recommend?
Oh, well, I have to say that I am right now reading 80 Days Around the World to my daughter.
Oh, nice.
Out loud by Jules Verne. And I read it.
How old is your daughter?
She's in second grade. She's 8. And we're really enjoying it. And part of what we're enjoying about it is, unlike other things we've read in the past, there are so many words that I have to figure out how to pronounce. And some that we've had to look up. And so I think it's been a really positive experience for both of us, because, it's all these kinds of proper names of various places. Right now we're traveling across India, and it's, all kinds of very complicated things. So it's been a really joyous experience. And I did forget about some of the more gory aspects of that particular piece of literature, but we're working through it.
Are you teaching your daughter Russian?
We are not, to the chagrin of my grandparents who are alive, but my husband is Israeli. And so we're working on Hebrew with various levels of success. Nice. But, we had to miss our trip to Israel last year, which really is a key aspect of that language sort of retention. And so we're looking forward to making up for lost time this summer, I hope.
Actually, Angela, that makes me, I don't think I've ever asked you this. Are your kids bilingual? You're bilingual, right? Are your kids bilingual?
My kids all went to a Jewish day school, so their Hebrew is quite excellent.
I'm sorry, I meant Korean. Do they speak Korean?
So my middle son started learning Korean on his own on Duolingo. Like he was had a 700+ day streak. And then when the pandemic hit, he was supposed to be a freshman in college. He decided to take a gap year, and he actually went to South Korea for 3 months. And he actually became quite fluent in Korean. And I think one of the most beautiful in language, as I'm sure Marina in particular understands, and all of us do, I guess, when we learn another language, but language is the key to him feeling he owned his Korean heritage in a way that he didn't feel before he couldn't speak it. And he also spent time with my relatives and a lot of other things. But one of the sweetest things is he came back from Korea in December, and he was committed to reteaching me Korean. And so, I now read Hangul again, and he taught me a lot of vocabulary. He was a very tough teacher. I didn't do enough of my homework, but he was like, Mom, you can't know your family if you can't speak Korean. And he was right. And so it's actually been this beautiful thing that he's brought back to me.
And what are you reading?
Well, I read 9 memoirs because I wanted to write a memoir. And so I read a lot of really good memoirs. And I'm reminded that people are so interesting. People that you've never heard of are so interesting. I particularly love this one by Sarah Seeger called The Smallest Lights in the Universe. She's like a MIT astrophysicist who lost her husband, and it's just it's amazing. I thought the book by Chanel Miller, Know My Name, was quite remarkable. There's so many good ones.
Great. But love that. Benay, what are you reading?
Well, I'll tell you what's on the top of my stack. Next
what are you not reading? Yeah, what are you not reading?
Well, let's see. I've been blessed to be part of an anti-racism study group. So I've, along with so many of you, have read that book list. But what's on the top of my stack are several books about leathercraft, because I'm a shoemaker, and during the pandemic, I haven't really had the focus and the time to work on shoes. So I've shifted into sort of fine leather goods, like European style leather accessories, wallets and such. So I'm studying ancient techniques of fine leather crafting, and that's what's next to my bed.
Okay, can you please go bring us a shoe or a fine leather purse or something to show us what you've made?
Yes, I will.
Question.
I will. Okay.
That is so awesome. I totally want to see it.
I just want to see what you're talking about, and I'm just like blown away. I'm a shoemaker.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be right back.
Okay. And we'll start on the next question, which is, and so look, I'm not sure everybody agrees with me, but I really feel like so much change has happened this year that all caused by negative things, but has really caused a lot of people, I think, to get focused on the essence of who they are and what they do, and they have found themselves in new ways. And so I've been thinking a lot about what parts of that I want to keep, and I'm afraid actually about going back to the new normal. I wrote about this, the old normal. I wrote about this a few weeks ago. So I'm really interested in hearing from you, and I really would invite people to offer their own answers in the chat in the spirit of what Benay did earlier. Just share with us a habit or a hobby that you are holding onto. And I'm realizing, Angela, that we may run over in terms of, I asked you to make it to our Torah and I may not have time. So, but let's start with Marina and then Angela, and then we'll go back to Benay with the leather. But just succinctly, what's something that you've started doing since the pandemic hit that you are going to keep doing for the rest of your life, or you hope to?
We started having breakfast together as a family, and it's not long. I mean, I also have a 4-year-old, and so it's not like we're sitting down to a 3-course meal of bars, obviously, but we've been having breakfast together on weekdays, and I think it starts our day off in a completely different way, because it gives us, even in that 10-15 minutes, an opportunity to talk about kind of what we're looking forward to, what we're anxious about, and all of that. And so I really hope we can carve that out going forward when we go back to the new normal.
Great. And let's go to Benay for the leather and for that, and then Angela, maybe you can wrap us with the Devar too.
Okay, so these are the shoes that I'm no longer making, but I did make. You get the idea. Shoes,
I mean, those are from a store.
Yeah, right.
What? Hey, this is crazy.
No. This was my thing. I was on a downward mobility phase before going to rabbinical school. So yeah, I apprenticed with a number of shoemakers, and this is sort of the more casual version. Okay, so now into small leather goods. So here are some examples. Let's see. So these.
I love that color.
Did you dye it also?
No.
Okay.
No.
Are these available on Etsy?
Thank you. Pardon me?
Are these available on Etsy?
No. I put too much time and love, and I only want to give them to people I love. So this is another example of.
Ooh,
okay. Yeah. It's a.
Beautiful.
You get the idea. Okay, and here this is a little notepad.
Wow.
This kind of thing.
So interesting.
Beautiful.
There's something about the intricacy of the attention to detail that is very Talmudic for me, and very meditative and healing.
Amazing. All right, Rabbi Angela.
Okay.
Your hobby or habit, or close us out with the Devar Torah. That's totally fine. And just thanks again to Gabby Brooks for hosting this, and to Lisa Lepson and Dina Cooperman for helping organize it. Thank you to all three of you. Amazing conversation. And thanks to everybody on the Zoom who joined. You will get a video of this with all the links in your email tomorrow or later today. Please come back to future events, and we'll end with Rabbi Angela and some Torah.
Well, I don't know if it's going to be Torah, but I'm going to answer your question anyway.
Great. Perfect.
I got really into making fermented foods over the pandemic. Making my own yogurt, making my own kombucha, making my own kimchi. And I think part of what I love about it is, and I'm going to, because rabbis love to take a metaphor and just beat it to death. So I'm just going to do that right now, is that you take something, you put it in a warm, dark place and you let it sit kind of isolated, and it transforms. Like you take liquid milk and you put it in a warm, dark place and it becomes a solid into yogurt. How is that crazy? And then you take kombucha and you just let it sit for like a week in a dark closet, and it comes out and it's fizzy and it's like got gas in it. And you take cabbage and garlic and then suddenly you've got like a connection to my heritage. So like I think that there is something about we've all been kind of in a state of fermentation. We've been a little bit isolated. We have been, kind of in these dark corners on our own. And I noticed that this scientific transformative process has happened, and things that are liquid and formless can take shape, and things that were just normal can actually have a spark of gas and light and bubble to it and joy, and something which was just a vegetable can become a link to my family and my community and my heritage for me and my son. So I guess there is a power to the isolation and to the little bit of sitting still, and there's also a time for it to come out and for us to emerge. And I guess I won't use my Devar Torah now, but if you want, my whole Devar Torah tomorrow night at services, which you can all join at 6:00 at Central, is about how hard it is to re-enter. And we're going to take some lessons from the priests who help the lepers re-enter back into the camp when they're deemed clean. So for all of you who are vaccinated but still having a hard time coming back into the camp, we can talk about that tomorrow night.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for joining us. Have a great Thursday. I don't think it's too early to say Shabbat Shalom. And tonight is the 19th day of the Omer, I think, at sundown. So take care. Thanks for supporting the Forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.